So thank you so much. And I'll hand the virtual mic off to Kathy and Victor to start the conversation officially.
Well, I thought I'd throw one thing out here, which is I don't think we can escape measurement and assessment of some sort. And so the question is our curriculum set up so that we have the freedom to make it as flexible as possible and as authentic as possible? And the problem, though, I think, and I was talking about this before we got officially started, is that I think students care about grades a lot. And I think that's troubling to me, because I want, I always give this lecture to the student who comes to me in tears because it's the first time they've ever gotten a C on a test. And I always say, well, you're going to learn more from having made these mistakes than you will from being perfect. Oh, that doesn't always register. Because I think so many times these kids haven't been taught that we're learning and that the grades are on the side there. But what we're trying to do is build skills and knowledge that you can apply. Yeah, the grades are there, but they're measuring how you're progressing. And I don't know about how you all do it, but I always weight it so it's much heavier at the end. And I give lots and lots and lots of assessments so that students, 1 or 2 bad grades aren't going to hurt them. But in the end, they want to know that grade. It's one of the problems I've faced. Victor?
Yeah, and I think the challenge there is the way kind of the system that in the environment and in the ecosystem in which higher education operates, what they reward and emphasize are those grades. Mm-hmm. So, what can we do to structure our classes in order to reward learning with those grades, right? So, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, as much as I'd love to have some kind of narrative evaluation and live in a utopian world where everybody we have cares only about learning and we can just interact with them. Reality is we sit inside of an ecosystem. And now 25-year-old me, 21 years ago would have said, well, let's blow up the system. But I've gotten a little, in my 21 years of life, I've lived, I've become a little bit more, a little less utopian. Anyhow, one of the things I do that I think tries to emphasize that is I allow my students to revise all their work at any time up to the end of the semester. As I started out, before we formally started, I was talking about how some of this is contextually dependent, right? In other words, some of my classes, so I teach math, as we noted, and some of them are classes that are like quantitative reasoning classes, and this is their requirement. It doesn't necessarily lead anywhere, so there's some freedom there. Another class I'm teaching this semester is for majors. It's called numerical analysis, and our students don't go on to graduate school or anything like that. So the content of that course doesn't matter as much as the bigger picture in numerical analysis, right? And there's some bigger pictures. So I have some freedom there as well. But if I was teaching Calc 1, when I teach Calc 1, of course, it's a little different because they have to go on to the next course. So then the question becomes, well, what is the minimum content they need in the next course? And then by hammering those big ideas home and giving students opportunities to revise, I'm hoping I'm creating an environment in which learning is valued. I'm skeptical, though. I'm skeptical that that's really happening in my student, that it's really affecting their values, as opposed to continuing to give them the rewards and currency that they're used to.
Well, I teach 3 different levels. I teach a freshman, sophomore introduction to literature course, which is in the required curriculum. And so I get a lot of students in there that are taking it because they have to. I teach upper division English majors, and I teach graduate students. And many of my graduate students are teachers themselves in the public schools. Or no, actually one is in a local college preparatory school. But anyway, I feel as though when the students that I teach in the core class, I have to start out by explaining to them why the core class matters. And I think a lot of times we don't do that. And so the students don't see the relevance. And so they just say, I've just got to get out of this class. Just give me the grade and let me out of here. But if I really push hard on that, about it being so relevant, and one of the ways I do it is I on every test, I give 3 big tests, but I also give tons of daily kinds of things all the time. But there's always a skills essay. And I start at the beginning of the semester with the skills, sort of a interpretive document that has a list of the skills that you really need in an English class, which are also skills you need, guess what, in life. And they do an inventory of those skills. And then I talk as we go in the first semester, first part of the course, just about what those skills, you're reading this novel, but here are the skills you're developing. And those skills can be used in this way. As the more I do that, the more engaged they get. And I think the more engaged they are, first of all, the better their grades are. But then they begin to realize the benefits of what they're experiencing. And so there's always going to be a couple of kids in there that think that I hate English, I've always hated English, I'm never going to like it. But when I make them write a team-based essay where I have a team of 5 people and they have to write together to do an essay, they experience writing in a different way. And then I give them the chance to rewrite a portion of that essay on the test. And so they've had the chance to learn from their classmates, learn from me in between times about how I want the essays to look. So I think if you give them different ways of coming at something to master it, you explain to them what the skills are we're aiming for, then I think they have a more realistic understanding of their own achievements. And so the grades are more meaningful. The one last thing I'll say real quick, I want all my students to make an A. And I tell them that at the beginning of the semester. And I'll tell them, if you'll do what I ask you to do, you will make an A. And I've always had every semester, there's some kid who came in who said, "You're right, Dr. Ross, I did." Yeah, because you did what I asked you to do.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm going to assume most of us in this listening to us want all their students to be successful. They want them all to get A's. They want them all to learn and master everything. I always assume the best of intentions. I feel like I like what you said about kind of teamwork and looking at things in new ways, monitoring their own skills. And I think the premise of what you and I have been talking about these last few minutes has been about trying to help students value their learning over their grades. Mm-hmm. Because, I was thinking about academic integrity issues and cheating. And in some ways, I think that's an act of desperation, at least for some, right? It's an act of somebody who doesn't have the resources to get the grade that they want. And so they're looking for a shortcut for one reason or another, but out of desperation, ultimately. So if they value the learning process, then their approach, they might be desperate to try and make mistakes rather than desperate to get the grade. But that's like trying to push an aircraft carrier with a mouse, trying to get that to work, to happen. But I think it's worth continuing to try, right? And trying to develop practices that really reward the learning process. But then now that brings me up to something that came up in the panel also, the medical school and nursing and healthcare contexts come up so much where the learning process is more than the learning process that matters. I mean, these are people that have to get the right answers because life and death may depend on their choices. So what do you think, Kathy, about that kind of context in terms of creating environments that
there's certain worlds that some of our students are going to where they do use these very blank, very cut and dried kind of exam grades and cutoffs on the LSATs and the MidCats and all of that. And so that's why I try, because I don't get too many of those in English classes, although usually I get them in my sophomore survey class. What I try to do there is I go after this notion of the more engaged you are, the more you're going to learn. And so I try to, it's kind of a back door, but I want you to make the A. Do you have the skills to make the A? What skills are needed for you to do that? And a lot of times, one of the things that was said in the last one was about our ethical responsibility. And I think that a lot of times faculty don't think it's their job to talk to kids about their sleep habits, or to talk to kids about managing their time better, or talk to their kids about getting a counselor if they need that help. And I think that certainly that it's weird, but this semester, I've always thought I was fairly close and open with my students, but this semester, this whole year online, I've actually gotten a lot more close to I've gotten closer to more of my students before. I think it's partly, they're in their bedrooms with their dogs and their cats walking past, and their parents sometimes, or their partners. And there's a greater intimacy. And I think that, where am I going? The chance to know them better helps me teach them better. And if they're stressed about things like, am I going to get into medical school? Am I going to get into grad school? Is more likely the thing I get. There's opportunity to lift them up better. I think it was Danny who talked about, how he suddenly realized I can learn. And last week I told one of my students, I said, Michelle, you have become one of the most insightful students, and I'm so excited about where you can go with this. And she just flushed. I mean, she got tears in her eyes. She couldn't believe that someone was telling her how much they believed in her. And I think that are giving them a lot more sort of personal attention to their skills, but also to their hearts, helps them raise up their energies and their hopes. And, that adds to their being able to accomplish stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that gets it into medical school, but I think, I think, better grades too.
Well, I think it could do more. I mean, so one of the questions I wonder if you've got the students, so we don't have a lot of students that go to medical school at Ferris. We do have a lot of students that go into nursing. But if I've been at other large R1 universities and as a graduate TA, you get the students that want to go to medical school, and there's a question of why do they want to go to medical school, right? Do they want to go to medical school because they think they can make a lot of money? Is it because their parents have always expected them to go to medical school? And you get some of that. Is it the external and extrinsic rewards, or is there something to helping people? I know a lot of the nursing students that I get, they like the idea of helping people, and they also, that's their image of what it means to be a professional. Maybe those are the only professionals they've interacted with, are the nurses that they see when they've gone into the doctor, and they say, yeah, I want to be able to be like that, right? That may be their role models. So my experience at Ferris has just been very different from R1s, right? Because of that. So I think getting to know them and helping them, if they're not going to get to medical school, maybe that's not the right environment for them, and helping them to see that, even as painful as it can be, very powerful. I'm just going to add another example from my life, from my story, about something similar, but it wasn't medical school. I had dreams in high school for about 2 years of becoming a big Broadway star. And I was getting voice lessons and everything. And it gets to my senior year. Our school had the highest level of choir was master singers. It was a small set of singers who were more dedicated and somewhat elite. I don't know, that's not the right word. I don't like the word, but however, I say that, but I wasn't in there because I was a great singer. I was in there because there's a dearth of men for something like that, right? But I didn't know that. And so it came time to try out for our musical. And at my high school, the musical stars were like the football players at others. It was really kind of a big deal. And I got called back, and I was expecting, in my senior year, a leading role, and I didn't read for a single leading role at all. And at the end, and I went home that day, and I cried my eyes out, but I learned this may not be my avenue. So what else can I do with my life? Now, fortunately, I'm a person with an enormous variety of interests, so that makes it a little easier. But you get students that have always wanted to go to medical school. They've always wanted to go to law school. It's all they've ever thought about. And it's a lot harder to get them to think about alternatives. But I think it's worthwhile.
Well, I think if you can get students to understand that what you're doing is you're creating a future by learning who you are. And learning who you are, of course, also includes your own ethical standards. And I think the closer, if you can build, as I think it was Jesse said, if you can start with a level of trust and build a kind of a level of trust within a classroom, then students can explore themselves. They also, I think they're much less likely to cheat. because they've begun to realize that this is something that's not just something you have to get through and get over with. And basically, I think they will do whatever they have to do if they don't value what we're asking them to do. And especially if they're just in a big hurry. And, I think when you said that about wanting to be an opera singer, I've got so many students who come in, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a famous rich person, is what a lot of them are saying. And most of them have no idea whether or not they're really skilled to do that job, nor do they really know what that job really entails. And so I think that I wish we would do more to help students as they make the transition from high school to college to understand that, yes, this is the way to get your life launched. This is the way to get to a great job and a new life, but that it's much more complicated than just getting some grades and getting through, and that there's more that we need to do. Now, one thing that came up, my students were telling me yesterday about how a group of them were really unhappy because in a large psychology class, a bunch of kids had formed a group me sessions, or I guess that's what you call it, and they were all taking the online test together. And the thing about that I realized was, on the one hand, I was pleased that my students said, I don't want anything to do with that. But the truth is that group of kids was probably teaching each other the answers, and they were probably learning. And it hit me that, well, that's kind of what I do when I have my students in the study team prepare this essay that they have to, I tell them, this is the essay we're going to write on Jane Eyre. This is the topic. You all create an essay together as a study team and turn it in to me, and you can decide how you do it however you want. But so they've had that experience together. And then in the class, now I do have, I've tried my test this year 2 different ways. One, I just put an honor code thing at the front, and I ask them to sign it. And I have a little speech there about, respecting yourself and respecting your family and making sure you're learning. This is an assessment for you to find out if you're getting where you want to go in this class, and if you're learning what you need to learn. And they sign it. And so they maybe cheat, they do. But this last time, I had to be out. And so my TA said, well, why don't we have them all join the class on Zoom, and I'll just sort of monitor. And so I said, well, okay, if you want to. And so I don't know if in either case I had more or less cheating, but I've finally gotten to the point after about 20 years of doing this that I feel as though if they're going to do it, they're going to do it, and they'll find a way. But if I can create a room and a collegiality amongst them and a respect for their own learning, that may keep them from it.
So, I'm curious so I have a lot of thoughts about what you just said. And I think a lot of them come down to the question of, in your course, what's the purpose of your tests?
Yes.
Right. So, and I ask that not rhetorically, because there are purposes for exams and tests. One of the classes I regularly teach is a financial math class for actuarial students, and they have to take a standardized exam that's external. So I think I'd be committing malpractice if they didn't have exams in class where they had a chance to, to help them prepare for, this thing that they're going to have to do. On the other hand, in my quantitative reasoning class, I don't see a point to have exams, right? So I don't. And instead I have them do, and I'm doing things, it's actually been evolving quite a bit, but I've worked with faculty in other disciplines in the programs that these students tend to come from. We've developed these case studies that are fairly involved, where students do things like, they might prepare a budget for a human trafficking victims shelter, or what they're doing this weekend is actually a result of a very complicated series of mini case studies in which they're looking at the spread of COVID in the Rohingya refugees who have to be evacuated from the Bangladesh coastal refugee camps because of monsoons that are coming. Right. And they have to make a budget for that. So this involves all kinds of interesting things. It involves exponential functions. and geometric series and stuff. You know, it's really cool, but they have to ultimately figure out how much is it going to cost. Right? But this is an authentic environment. I expect them to collaborate and to teach one another and to help one another. I don't necessarily know if they're just passing a spreadsheet along, right? It's possible. And I'd say in some cases they might be doing that. But the question ultimately I have is, are they learning? And if if you create an environment in which they can disclose that here's how we did this work, then then they're being honest and citing their sources, right? Then I think there might be a way to help. The question is, are they getting out of the course what you want them to get out of the course? Now, in my situation, I'm talking about general education. I don't know that I need the specifics. I mean, I don't necessarily need them to know about exponential functions and geometric series. I'll bet a large number of the audience here may hear those words and say, I don't remember what those are, or maybe I heard them at some point. But but what I would like them to do is appreciate how the mathematical work that mathematicians can do fits into a larger social story, right? And if they're seeing that, get some appreciation for that process and the modeling process, even if they haven't quite mastered all the algebra that's involved, maybe that's good enough, right? Maybe that's certainly what they'll take 20 years down the road.
Well, I still do give exams, and I'll tell you why I do it. When I was in grad school at UT Austin, I had, all the courses everybody else takes, and the courses where I had a final exam always gave me a sense of completion. And I oftentimes felt as though my classes were so much about my own private work. And yet if I had an exam, it was a way for me to check in and make sure I was getting what the teacher wanted. And so I explained that to my graduate students last night, because a lot of times they kind of wonder why you're doing it. And they all actually said, yeah, it does work. We've had you before, Dr. Ross, and we've had the other ones, and we do feel like ours is complete. But I'll tell you the other thing that I think I rely on more for telling me about what my students are accomplishing. I created, and I tell you what, I stole this from an economics professor at a Lilly conference. And he taught me to do something called the CPA, which stands for Class Preparation Assignment. And what they are, and it's a little bit of work to create them at first, but once you have them in the can, you got them, is it's a series of reading questions to get the student into the assignment that you're going to have in class the next day. And so it's like a quiz, but they have one every night, so there's like 30 of them, but they're really good, smart, deeper reading kinds of questions that the students have to, and they only have to do 75% of them. They don't even have to complete it all. My TA and I just kind of go, yeah, they did them. And you come into class and they're like, they know stuff better because they know what I wanted them to read for. They know, and by about 2 months into class, well, not 2 months, about 5 or 6 weeks in, they're almost able to predict what the question should be and how to do. So they're developing that kind of insightful, critical reading skill that I want them to do. And so that's a kind of an assessment. And if I have a lot of those done and they've done well, guess what else happens? They get A's on the damn test.
I just want to say what you said at the beginning of that about that sense of completion, or as I identify it, closure, so resonated with me because that was my experience too. I do remember, so I'll share this. I'm in my second career. My first career, which wasn't in my intro, but my first career was as a lawyer. And when I transitioned and left the law for math, I went back and restudied all the math classes that I had taken. Now I took math classes as an elective. I was a little weird, but I had taken 6 math classes. What they were isn't so relevant, but here's the relevant point. Some professors I had, if you were doing really, really well going into the final and essentially had an A, they'd exempt you from the final exam. And when I was reviewing that, as I was transitioning from law to math, I noticed that my sense of, as you put it, completion for those classes where I didn't take the final exam was not as strong as it was for the others. So that really resonated me. I have to think through about what is it about the exam that does that. So for me, it was going back over the entire course and putting the course together as a coherent whole at the end. So I'm not sure I'm not convinced my students have the habits to do that in preparing for a final exam. I'm sure some of them do. but I'm not so sure that doing that but I think that process of reviewing and reconstructing and reflection is in and of itself a useful skill, right? And it's valuable. And I don't think if I gave them a final, and I'm thinking of my quantitative reasoning students, especially now, if I gave them a final, I don't think that would get that done. So what I've done is I've been making these kind of final reflections where they have to go back and review, I think, really deep, big ideas and try and put them together as a whole. And I've tried various prompts and various reflections, but something like that at the end, that's not in the form of an exam. But I agree with you, some sense of closure and putting a course together as a whole and everything is critical to having that sense that your class has been, that there's this sense of something has been completed.
I think we probably ought to start taking some questions, but one thing I wanted to add here is just that one of the things I've discovered this last year is I think I've started doing less material and more working closely with students, because I think you're right. I don't think a lot of them have the skills, the study skills that we thought they did, and the way to focus themselves and the way to pace themselves. And even senior English majors don't seem to know how to write yet. And so I have spent more time with conferences with students on their papers and peer reviewing and things like that, and less time talking about a poem or talking about a novel. And I think it's really a better move. It may be more ethical on my part to be working more closely with them in their learning skills. And so who's got some questions to throw at us? Do we just go to the, there's
I'll help with that.
yes,
Kathy.
send us some questions.
We've got like 14 questions here.
Yes, we do have a few questions. And I think also we have a comment from Victoria about what we were just talking about the final exams. And she just wanted to mention also that she uses final projects instead of final exams for this closure piece. Yes. So let me surface this question here. And I'm sorry if I surfaced any questions that have already been addressed. If I've been trying to multitask, let me know that this has been taken care of. So what do you do if there are multiple faculty members teaching the same course and one thinks there needs to be tests and one does not? Consistency issues with assessments. How do you deal with that?
You want to take this one or do you want me to start?
Well, there's only two of us that teach the class and I'm the senior person. And so I get to kind of dictate it. So you better take it, Victor.
All right, so I'll take it. So I can tell you what we do at my institution, but this is one of those I haven't quite completely resolved because my institution, we have very few classes with that many sections. But at my institution, I think part of it's because we're a unionized institution, so I think that impacts us. But we have a very broad notion of academic freedom. So if somebody teaching the class wants to use exams and another doesn't, that's what they're going to do. If you're trying to do a large-scale assessment of the course as a whole, right, and of the program, that does become very problematic. With my quantitative reasoning course, we have about 3 or 4 faculty who teach it. Our goals, I think, can be met in different ways. The goals are kind of bigger picture. It's not, so some of us use exams, some of us don't. I feel that, so here's my philosophy on assessment. And you know, this is kind of coming from the gen ed, my gen ed director kind of hat, is I feel like the most important thing about assessment is the conversation, right? The closing the loop. Yes, you want consistent data. There are ways of getting that. You could have some common questions that are done in a common type of an environment. But ultimately, I think I worry that if we over-standardize some of the things we do for assessment, we might be losing something, right? We might be losing that human connection, right? And we might be, that sense that we own the curriculum and we know what's going on, right? And therefore, and I question about how objective that can really be. And we can try, you can develop rubrics, you can norm the rubrics, right? Stuff like that. And there's a lot of good efforts there. But at some level, I wonder if it's how much of that is the tail wagging the dog, when if we just look at our data, we can have a conversation and say, well, we know what's going on in our classes. This is where I think we can improve. I think we need more of this, less of that. I don't think this course is designed to meet these outcomes and we need to redesign it to meet the outcomes. A lot of that happens when you interpret whatever the data is. I will say a caveat though, right? Here's where that point I just made kind of fails. And that's that if you've got faculty who will use the lack of scientific method, for lack of a better word, in the assessment process, they may use that as an excuse to say, well, this isn't going on in my class. And
I'll tell you one thing though, that I think we have a problem in higher education. I don't think we have enough professors that are very enlightened about their grading policies. And there are a lot of people sort of in my cohort that came in when I did about 20 years ago who are not going to change. And it's very troubling. And you're not probably going to get them to collaborate with you on any kind of more enlightened way of doing it. And so I take that as a learning opportunity to my students and tell them, look, this is what's going to happen to you out in the working world. You're going to get people that are going to assess you in all sorts of unfair ways. You've got to figure out how to deal with that.
Mhm.
And that's another kind of test, if you will.
Yeah, and this is why I don't worry too much about some variety, because the students are always they're gonna have more than my class, right? So my undergraduate students are taking 120 credits, right? So that means assume 3 credits per class, which isn't always true, but that's, like 40 different classes. And they're gonna have 40 different grading styles, and it's just like when they're in the work world, and they're gonna have
boss changes the rules.
Different bosses, different clients, all kinds of stuff. So that's another reason. And some of it's the luck of the draw, right? When I was a lawyer and I got stuck, I was assigned to a matter that had a client that was more difficult to work with than others. That's like getting a professor that's harder than others. So I don't, so anyhow, that's my thinking. So I don't know how well we answered the question, but.
Sure. So let's take this question from Kelly Hantek. I would love to hear your opinion on assessments during class in a virtual synchronous class. Not attendance points, but activities that they need to be present to participate actively in. So for example, creating a brochure together in a breakout room and then all group members teaching the class. There is a big discussion in my school about this.
Oh, I think that sounds wonderful. My students report they love breakout rooms. And I try to pop in every now and then to make sure something's going on. They're not just talking about, DMZ or whatever that music guy that Danny was talking about this morning.
DMX.
DMX, thank you. But
Peace out.
I think that they like to collaborate a lot, and I think that they don't get the chance to do it as much. It's funny, they don't like group work, but if you schedule a study team exercise or something that's very carefully sort of curated and managed so that the students all know the different roles they have to play, and they also don't really get a group grade. They get their own effort will be assessed in some way. Usually I have them assess each other, and boy, does that ever straighten out their thoughts about it.
Yeah, I do something similar. So I keep coming back to my QR course, but the same thing is true in my other class I'm teaching this semester. Is I do like them to have to do things in class. I feel in synchronous classes. So in the 2 classes, it's different. In my numerical analysis class, the students tend to show up. My quantitative reasoning class, I'd say about half the class shows up. The other class half watches the videos. And I know they're watching the videos because they're turning in their work. So either they already know what to do or they're watching the videos or something, but whatever it is, they're getting stuff done. So I'm not too worried about them. So I don't necessarily grade those assessments, what they do in class, but I definitely have them doing things, and I'm definitely watching what they're doing as formative assessment. And I've got 2 different reactions. So in my numerical analysis class, a lot of the stuff I have them do. So for those of you who don't know what numerical analysis is, don't worry about it. Basically think about algorithms, right? And so we'll talk about an algorithm, and then I'll have them get into small groups and code it, right? Write computer code to make it happen. They love it. I go into the rooms and they're talking, and somebody's sharing their screen and they're coding together, and they're trying things and they're saying, oh, that didn't work. What if I change this? And it's wonderful. And then we come back, and I've seen their coding skills grow dramatically this semester. It's been great. It almost reminds me of what happens in Harry Potter when they actually do things with their wands, right? That's kind of what it feels like. In my QR class, it's a little bit different. I'll often go into the rooms to have them work on some stuff. It's a very active learning. It's supposed to be an active learning class. I've dialed back on that with the pandemic, with all of us in survival mode, but I'll go in and take a peek and I see 3 black boxes with names and they're all muted, right? With one exception, those case studies I talk about, they get quite chatty with those case studies. Those case studies bring them alive. I've seen that in the classroom too. And so because of that, last semester, it was what I had done in the past was we do the case study at the end of every chapter. We'll do some installment on a case study. Now and I noticed the same thing I just described. So I talked to an instructional designer who said, well, why don't you just split it up and do the case studies in pieces throughout the chapter, which is what I'm doing now. And I'm getting a lot more engagement, but it really is still limited to the case studies, right? So I'm seeing these very different stories, but I think the difference is motivation. I think there's some kind of sauce in those case studies that get them excited and get them talking. I've had guest speakers this semester too. So like I had somebody coming to talk about human trafficking and stuff. And so I think there's something very powerful to the stories, these human stories that are getting the QR students excited. And I think the numerical analysis students are excited because they already like the topic and they like to write code and, it's a defined task and stuff. So I think there's, and I think it comes down to motivation. So anyhow, getting back to the question, I always get excited sharing these things. I'd say my opinion is those are good things to do, activities, maybe they have to present, give them a grade for it with a rubric if that works with your students and with how things are going in their environment. I think that I love this idea of creating a brochure together. I don't know what you teach, but that's a beautiful idea.
I think also Kelly commented that obviously this is causing a problem because they're having attendance issues now because the sessions or the classes are recorded.
Well, I'll tell you what, I meet my classes as if online, as if it's a regular class every day, Tuesday, Thursday from 11 till 12:25. And I take attendance, and I also require every week the students either have to speak up or write something in the discussion board or the chat 4 times. And I've been doing that for years. And a lot of students, especially the ones who want to just skate through the class, they get real annoyed with me at first. And then when they start to be more actively engaged and they're required to do it, guess what they say in the evaluation at the end? I'm really glad she made me learn to speak up. I found my voice. And I find that, and I also have an attendance policy that says you can't just give me a black box unless unless I know that this is a person who lives in a dorm where they have terrible or is traveling or something like that. You just have to make them do it, because one of my students the other day told me that she's a high school teacher. Her student turns on his phone, logs in, blacks out the picture, and then goes to hang out with his girlfriend in the parking lot. And I'm sorry, they're going to do that, so you just don't let them have the opportunity.
So getting back to Kelly's point, Kelly's point that they are having attendance issues. If you want to give them a grade for those assessments, my advice is find a way to give those who aren't coming an alternative way to satisfy it, whether that's an alternative assignment or you ask them to watch the video and then work with some people outside of class to produce the brochure.
Stephanie's right. There are equity issues that come up with that. But I try real hard to manage those before I lay the policy. And so I explain to people, if those are things for you that are getting in your way, I'm not going to make it worse for you. So I do take account for that. But unfortunately for me, our university is pretty good about providing good resources for everybody. So I think it's less of a problem on my campus than it might be on some.
I agree about the equity issues. They're critical, and those who aren't attending, you don't know. I'm thinking back to my response to Kelly's question. You don't know what else is keeping them from attending. We have a problem on my campus where our local employers are not very forgiving about scheduling around students' schedules. Now, I'm talking about like your McDonald's and stuff like that. So I think you always have to think through those equity issues. I have a minimal amount of policies because of that. I don't enforce deadlines, which I know is in and of itself somewhat controversial, but as Catherine mentioned, they're going to have plenty of classes where deadlines are enforced. So I figure if my class can be the one that gives them a little slack so they can stay above water, that's fine with me. Plus it helps combat the image of math as so harsh and so black and white and very, very unforgiving. And I figure, I can't remember what the last thing I was going to say about the deadlines thing. But anyhow.
Well, we only have 1 minute left. I don't think we can take any more questions unless you can answer one question in 30 seconds. Would you like to have any closing remarks before we end the session in the next minute?
Well, I would just say the more you can relate to your students as an individual and let them see your humanity and show them that, you have eyes that see them, that you recognize that they're human and that they have a life that you care about, the more likely you are to get them to want to study with you.
I'm going to add to that, be willing to adapt to the student needs as you find them.
Very much, absolutely.
My philosophy is I'd rather have one person take advantage of me than somebody not get what they need. So there's going to be error on either side. So just a matter of deciding which error you can live with, which error can you live with the most.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ross and Dr. Piercey. This was great. Thank you everybody for joining us on this session and for sharing your perspectives in the chat and through questions. Our next session starts in 15 minutes, so please use the link that Mandy will drop in the chat to join. And also for that next session, we'll have 3 educators from our community who will be answering attendees' questions and leading discussions on rethinking assessment, faculty professional development, and student engagement. So have fun, and thank you, everybody.